Well, the conference season is upon us. Liberal Democrats are gathering in Bournemouth. I'm joined by the Conservatives' mayoral candidate, senior figure in the party, Steve Norris, who's got is very interesting on the Lib Dems, actually, and I will ask him about that later. But thanks very much for coming in, first of all. Could I begin by asking for your assessment of where you think your party is at the moment, what the challenges are for the Conservatives at the start of this very important, probably pre-election conference season?
Well, I think that the challenge is to think about 1992 when, frankly, Neil Kinnock should have run away with the election and didn't, because people, however disgruntled they were with the then Conservative government, said, but we're still not going to go to the then opposition, something to do with, you know, Neil Kinnock himself, possibly John Smith's then shadow budget. That's the position the Conservatives are in now. You've got, in many people's view, one of the least competent, most cynical, some would argue most dishonest governments in living memory, but the opposition is still way off the point where they can see that people regard them as the viable alternative. And that's got to be the Tories' sole focus, to emerge from the conference season and to move into what I agree with you is likely to be the last 8 months of this Parliament, presenting themselves as the logical alternative to a discredited government. They're not there yet. And whether, you know, recent events have made that any more likely is something I personally would question. I don't think just shoring up your core vote by appearing to move the party to the right, as the last reshuffle, for example, appeared to do, is going to do anything to capture the vital middle ground, without which you'll simply not win an election.
Well, let me explore both those 2 points with you. First of all, your assessment of where your party is. Way off sounds quite a long way from getting to a position where they can win an election.
I'm just reading the polls. I'm not offering any insight that anybody else, you know, watching this program couldn't get. I mean, the simple, stark fact is that we've got a long way to go. Do I think we can get there? Yes, indeed. I certainly think we can. But we've got to start, for example, talking about what it is that people actually care about. I'm much less interested in a rather arcane debate about the merits of choice and free market economics in a managed public sector, you know, and much more concerned about saying, when I go to my local hospital, is it going to be a hospital where if I've broken my arm, I'm going to get clean, decent, quick treatment in a decent, good-looking, reassuring accident and emergency unit? If I have to go there because I'm carted away on a stretcher, am I going to get MRSA when I get there? You know, I just want answers about outcomes. I want to know that my local school is going to be good enough for me not to have to save up to send my child outside the state system. Those sorts of practical issues, which we focused on very much in London and got a great deal of success with, are where the Tories need to be. Less theory, less worry about whether or not we've got UKIP on our tail, and much more concentration on outcomes, on performance, on delivery, on delivering a more efficient, better organised, decent set of public services.
Do you worry? I mean, you fought a pretty good mayoral campaign in the last Parliament, and instead of following your kind of approach, as we all know, William Hague would accept, I think, they moved further to the right towards the end of that Parliament. Your assessment of the shadow cabinet reshuffle seems to suggest that you're worried that they're doing it again. They're not following the kind of tone you adopted with some success in London. They are going for a grassroots strategy. That's your worry, is it?
Well, again, I think much about reshuffles is not in the detail, but in the perception. And the perception is that the reshuffle took the party quite significantly to the right. When you add in John Redwood and you take out Damien Green, John Bercow and Julie Kirkbride, there's little doubt as to which way the pendulum has swung. And I think it is true to say that it was not a successful move to have taken the party to the right before the 2001 election. I don't think there's any suggestion there's going to be any more successful this time. I mean, and after all, it is one of the great truisms of politics that elections are not won from the extremes, they're won from the centre. I'm not talking about sort of wishy-washy Blairite New Labourism either. I'm talking about policies which simply can attract a real consensus among voters. What the Tories have got to remember is that their best turnout in terms of the national popular vote was actually in 1992, when 14.3 million people voted Tory. That was down to just over 10 million in 2001. A lot of us thought, in 1997 rather, forgive me, the chronology is quite important, down to 10 million in 1997, what we thought was our worst year. No, it wasn't. In the next 4 years, astonishingly, the party's vote fell to 8.6 million. That's a core vote by all means. They probably will never vote for anybody else, but it's never going to be enough. You've got to be back up beyond the sort of 11, 12 million mark to guarantee that you can win a general election, and we are a long way off that.
Yeah, you sound worried. I mean, could it get worse in this chronology you describe? Is there a danger of that?
Well, you know, I'm not here to be a doomsayer for the party. I'm here to say that what the party's got to do is to think about how it presents itself in a way that will appeal to those voters who are currently not committed, who are not particularly enamoured of New Labour, but who are looking for a party that offers a real attractive alternative and that talks their language.
And what do you think is at stake if they don't follow your advice on this broad strategy?
Well, what is at stake is the worst possible outcome for many people in this country, which is the prospect of another term for the Labour Party, this time, of course, an even more bitterly fought over term, in which there's no doubt that the left is going to be in the ascendant, in which taxes are going to rise even more, where you're going to see even more spats with organised labour and the resurgent and renascent trade unions. I mean, all of that's going to be very, very unattractive. I suspect it'll be the last Labour government you get, but these are going to be painful times, and the way to avoid it is for the Tories to be presenting themselves as the kind of party that people say, yeah, you know, that's the sort of party I want, a party that's offering me an answer to the problems I've got. I recognise they understand my pain. That's what you need. That's what Labour did so well before 1997.
If your analysis is right, you're asking Michael Howard to do a rather difficult thing. That if you are right, that he is adopting that strategy of moving to the right to shore up the core vote, to tackle UKIP, you're now saying, that's not working, change it quickly. That's asking quite a lot, but that's what you're asking him to do, isn't it?
It's asking quite a lot of people if you say to them, I don't think this is the right strategy, and by implication you're asking them to turn the other way. But I mean, I'm simply saying what I know that virtually every Conservative Party member that I talk to is saying, and more importantly, what a lot of people are saying who aren't necessarily committed either way and would find an alternative to this government rather attractive. They're the ones who are saying, I don't honestly think just chasing off to the right's going to do any good. You know, whether unfortunate or otherwise, the reality is that what we're looking at the moment is a party that seems to be turning its face to the past rather than to the future. And what people want in Britain's cities, certainly in London as in other cities, is an answer to the kind of problems that they meet every day. Problems of crime on the streets, problems with their education and with their local health services. And they want practical answers, not theory, not process, just outcomes, just changes that we as a party commit to making. That's what I think we've got to be concentrating on.
OK, well, let's broaden the context of this, because a couple of years ago when you came in here, I think probably on the very equivalent day, you made a very clear warning that the Liberal Democrats could become the party of opposition unless your party really got its act together. Is that, in your view, still a danger?
It's certainly a danger. I mean, I think we've seen some polls during the course of this week that suggest that among young voters, the Lib Dems are now on the same rating as the Conservatives. I don't read too much into any poll any more than anybody else does, but it's a typical warning shot, I think, to my party, just to remember where the Liberal Party were themselves a century ago. There's no such thing as a permanent right to a place at the political table, whether in government or in opposition. And I think what we've got to do as a party is to make sure that opportunist Lib Dem tactics, and I think in the main they are opportunist tactics, can't take advantage of a principled Conservative Party. We had, you know, a Lib Dem candidate in the mayoral election who, it's fair to say, we saw off relatively easily. People kept telling me, gosh, you know, there's every chance they could jump over you and get into sort of second place or even first place. We were very clear that was never going to be an issue, because we were clear about what we were presenting, we were practical, and we were a clear alternative to the status quo in City Hall. That's the way the Conservatives can separate themselves from the Lib Dems. If they don't, well then, you know, the worst of all possible worlds would be to see the Lib Dems actually vault over the Tories and be in second place in the British political spectrum.
You see, presumably, to follow your earlier analysis, Michael Howard is sitting there thinking, that cannot happen. The Lib Dems will not leap over us and become second place. But we've got this problem with UKIP, and therefore we need to do that, bring in John Redwood, etc., etc. Your view is it is a real possibility in British politics that they could overtake?
It's always said of the Lib Dems, and I think rightly, that the closer they got to power and the more scrutiny which was applied to their policies, the less attractive they would look. Many years ago, a political commentator observed that if you asked most people whether the Lib Dems were to the right of the Tories, to the left of Labour, or somewhere in the middle, most people would say they were somewhere in the middle. You and I know that they're actually well to the left of Labour. So I freely acknowledge that the closer the Lib Dems got to looking like real opposition, the less attractive they would find the prospect, and the more perhaps people might start to question them. But I just make one very simple point, which is that there is no such thing as an automatic right to the table. I mean, if, for example, New Labour, particularly under the present Prime Minister, is seen to be the party of the almost centre-to-centre right middle class, redefining right and left in the way that I think we're forced to do in the 21st century, what you have to ask is, where is the place for the Conservative Party at that table? Now, I think it's a very clear place, and it's a place that stands for big people, little government, that stands for less nannyism, getting out of people's lives, a way the hunting bill rather demonstrated this week, of presenting clear practical alternatives to a government that doesn't, at the very end, deliver what it says it wants. But that can't be an automatic right. That can only come when we're presenting the kind of face to electors that people actually want to see.
You mentioned hunting there. This is finally, because we've been talking in a way about the huge political question about where parties function on the left and right, but just on the specifics of hunting. You mentioned earlier there's always a danger of a party looking back to the past. Are you worried at all that, in spite of the chaos the government seems to be in terms of getting this thing through, its ban on fox hunting, that the Conservatives will go into the election saying that they will bring it back, come what may? They will not adopt the ban, and that there is a danger in the symbolism of that is backward looking. On the specifics, have you any worries about that?
Funnily enough, I have less worries about that now, because I, like anybody who's been in politics for the last 20 years, has seen this debate about hunting shift quite dramatically. When I was first in Parliament, it was very much a debate about animal welfare, and one where I may say, as somebody who has never hunted, never wants to hunt, and thinks the whole thing is pretty unappealing, I was very much more inclined to be an abolitionist than to be a supporter. But it has been one of the great shifts of the debate over the last literally 20 years that it now does very much seem to be nanny, urban nanny telling the rural child how to run its life. I've become much more convinced that this is, in the end, an argument about cultural differences between those of us who live in cities and those who live in the country. And I really do think that the idea of live and let live is one that the overwhelming majority of people in this country find, frankly, rather more attractive. I think the position the Conservatives should therefore adopt is to say that what we won't do is to impose an urban culture on a rural society any more than the reverse would be acceptable to those of us who live in cities. That might very well mean abolishing the present legislation in Parliament. It doesn't mean ignoring the Burns report. It doesn't mean ignoring all the other evidence that perhaps regulation of this particular practice might be desirable, but that in the end, people in the countryside should live their lives. That's what I want them to do. I want them to leave me in the city to get on with mine.
OK, Steve Norris, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. OK, we'll be looking very shortly at the morning's papers, but first we're going to take a break.
Round the clock, they protect and serve.
You can take this with you while you're at it.
In the line of fire, they stand firm.
Another burglary, Sarge. Try not to start a mass panic, eh?
As crime never sleeps, they never stop.
Answer that. Coffee break.
Cleaning up the streets.
This is where they got in.
Heartbeat style.
Mass Ventures can read anything in his tea leaves with nothing else to go on.
The Sunday night favorite is back. Heartbeat tonight at 8. ITV1.
Back in the 80s, over 500,000 elephants were slaughtered for their ivory. And the problem goes on. We need your help. Your signature could save their lives.
Helen Worth with the elephants in Kenya on Monday, and hear her story live Tuesday on GMTV.
Welcome back to the Sunday programme. Let's see what the weather's got in store for us today. Here's Stephanie.
GMTV weather, sponsored by Tops Tiles, brightening homes, whatever the weather.
Well, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland will start rather cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but across much of England and Wales it'll be dry with sunny spells this morning. Through the afternoon it'll turn wet and very windy across Northern Ireland and much of Scotland, with gales at times. Further south, cloud will increase from the west, but many central and eastern parts will hold on to some sunny spells. Temperatures will struggle to reach 14 Celsius in the rain, peaking at 19 Celsius in the sunnier southeast. Now back to Steve.